Good morning. I think the fact that I'm appearing now is my cue to get us going this morning. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the College of Biological Sciences Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Town Hall. It's really my great pleasure to welcome Vice Chancellor Renetta Tull this morning, who will be speaking at this town hall. As you likely know, Renetta joined UC Davis in July 2019, coming from a vice provost gig at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Since her arrival, Renetta has absolutely transformed the campus discussion of DEIJ issues and has transformed the work that we do. It's been really quite amazing. And she's been very supportive of our efforts here in CBS, including the appointment of Vicky Watson-Zink as the graduate student advisor to the dean on DEIJ, and she's been a trusted consultant and advisor with Vicky on her activities in the college, and with Karen Zito as the past FEC chair and her work in forming and launching our DEIJ committee. We really greatly appreciate that work, and today she's expanding that role to have a discussion with the entire college, and I greatly appreciate her time in doing that. And I will now turn it over to Vicky Watson-Zink, who hopefully most of you know or have met, who will moderate our session today. Renetta, welcome and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, great to be here.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Dean Winey. And thank you to the existing CBS DEIJ committee and all of our CBS staff that helped to arrange and organize and run today's webinar. I'm thrilled to sit down and chat with you today, Vice Chancellor Tull, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want to start with a bit of organizational information about today's town hall. So for the first 45 to 50 minutes or so, we'll be talking through some questions across 3 general topic areas related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And then for the final 10 to 15 minutes, we'll open up the floor for a general question and answer session with our audience. Some of the people in the audience have already pre-submitted some questions, so thank you so much for those questions in advance. During our discussion today, please also feel free to pre-submit some questions in our Q&A session of the Zoom. And finally, today's webinar is recorded, so it'll be available with captions on our new CBS DI website in a few days' time. And to access that website, you can go to diversity.biology.ucdavis.edu. And Ted just put it in the chat for people who don't already have that bookmarked. Great. So let's get started with our first topic area, which focuses on the organizational structure of our new CBS Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee. So to give everybody a bit of background, so last year we created an ad hoc CBS Diversity Committee that was made up of grad student rep, which was me, several postdoc reps, staff, and faculty. And one of our immediate goals as a committee was to begin laying the groundwork for a more permanent committee in our college. And we envisioned creating a longstanding committee that was composed of representatives from all career stages in our college. That includes undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, staff, and faculty. And we wanted the organizational structure of this future committee to be flat. So we want everybody in that committee to have equal standing within the committee. So we want to first establish this committee through the dean's office. And so my first question for you, VC Tull, is do you think that there are associated pros and cons for establishing this committee through the dean's office?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Dean Winey. Thank you to Associate Dean Powers. And may I say thank you to you, future Dr. Watson-Zink, on your work and for moderating today. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks to all of the people in the audience who came. Wow, 89 folks. So that's really great. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules this morning. So to get to the committee, first of all, congratulations on having the committee. So moving forward toward having a committee is definitely a major step. It is a positive step. It's one that says that the college as a whole takes diversity, equity, inclusion, justice very, very seriously. So there are people within the college who are going to take time out of their schedules and put effort toward this, this kind of endeavor, and that it has the support from the overall administration within the college. And in terms of pros and cons, I think that it has many pros, of course. I think I wouldn't really say cons. I would just say that in terms of the structure of the committee, something that has an egalitarian structure is very noble and it can work. It does need to make sure that whoever is in the lead as the chair or as the co-chairs, that they make sure that everyone on the committee recognizes that all of the voices are equal in this particular committee, that all of the votes are equal. So everyone has to have voting rights if you're going to do this. And so I think it just requires making sure that those kinds of things are in place. Having a standalone college level committee is a good thing. I think you do have to think about the other committees that are in the college. So for example, I know that CBS has other faculty committees and their curricula and awards and all of those kinds of things. So where does this committee fall within that structure? There are other committees with graduate groups. I think you have five or so. No, is it 5 or 9 graduate groups? I forgot how many. Several graduate groups within the college. But you know, when you think about your other committees within the 8, thank you to Nicole. Excuse me. When you think about the other committees in the college, the question is, where does this stand? You want to make sure that it is not something that sits to the side. The last thing you want for a DEI kind of committee or DEIJ committee is for it to be marginalized. Yes. Right? You want it to be part of whatever the structure is for committees. Any other college, well, so here's a question, are there any other college-wide committees, or are all of the other committees within the college sort of segmented among people with different ranks or different backgrounds? So I don't know if you have the answer, or if Dean Winey wants to chime in, or Associate Dean Powers wants to chime in.
So I think, so far as I know, this is going to be the first committee that does have, you know, representatives from so many different levels. And so I think it's sort of novel in that we're trying to include so many different voices from so many different areas that are affected by, you know, these diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And so we want these voices from different stages on this committee for that reason.
Okay. So one of the things that I have seen in colleges at other universities, when there is something that is sort of more widespread and it's not singular to a particular group, then that means sometimes it doesn't necessarily come under a particular associate dean or assistant dean. It might come under the dean directly. So sometimes that's how it's structured, to just make sure that all of the areas and all of the constituents feel like they have an equal voice. So it can depend. It can go under an associate dean who might be in charge of that, or it can go under the dean themselves, related to how they want to structure it.
Do you know about any other committees on campus that have a similar structure to what we're hoping to create, with, you know, so many different voices from different career stages?
Yes. So one of the most successful is DVAR, which is an academic department, but it's our development and alumni relations group that is led by Vice Chancellor Sean Keister. And they had a DEI group, very specific, that had people from all different ranks of staff within the DEI committee. Very, very constructive. They went through training for the D&I strategic vision, which has 5 different goals. And I think most of the people here are familiar with the inclusion strategic vision that we have for the campus. If not, if you prompt me, I'll give you more information on minutes. But they went through training on the D&I strategic vision. Then they went through those 5 goals, and they had all of the different things within their unit that connected to those 5 goals. They looked to see where they had gaps, and they looked to see where they could have recommendations. And then what they did was they made recommendations to the leadership, to VC Keister and some of the other leaders in the senior leadership team, related to what they thought. And they made some very well thought out recommendations. What could be put into place to improve their relations, both internally and externally. And then that the leadership team then took it under advisement and came back to say, okay, we're going to do these things or these other things. We're going to put on a timeline and we're going to try to put those into place a little bit later, but there were very positive responses. So that turns out to be a very good structure where a committee makes specific recommendations. And when you get people who are from a variety of different career ranks or ranks within, in this case, a college, then you have a chance to hear representation from everyone. You also do need at least maybe probably one person or two people from administration who have knowledge of policies, who have knowledge of what can and can't happen as easily or as quickly. For example, things that have to go through the academic senate or things that might have to be on a budget kind of timeline. So there are those kinds of things in place. So when you have all the voices at the table, then that can be very helpful.
So that can be a great model for what we're trying to create in our college. And thank you so much for giving us that advice. I think that's going to be a great framework for us as we're moving forward.
Yes, you're welcome.
That's exciting. And so in terms of creating this really representative committee, possible, do you think just having equal voting rights for everyone is a great idea for moving forward to make sure that everyone has equal standing?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I think that works very, very well. And it makes everyone feel empowered. It also, for example, I mean, all faculty were students once, right?
Yes.
Most of our staff, we were all, they were all students once. And so we kind of remember when we were undergraduate students, how we wanted to go and change the world or whatever it was that we wanted to do. And I had the really wonderful privilege of being in a group called NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. And it was a student-run organization, but as students, we had an opportunity to connect with the, they called it the, what was it, BOC, Board of Corporate Affiliates, the BCA. And at the time, we really felt empowered because we were literally sitting with, corporate VPs and talking about the things that we wanted to see, putting in our own recommendations, thinking about it. When I was a graduate student, I was on a similar committee with faculty, with our dean, with our chair of department, and those kinds of things, not only do they build up leadership for the students themselves, but there are a lot of good ideas that can come. Sometimes they're idealistic, but that's okay because you need that as well. But it's also helpful for then faculty and staff who may have been in their careers for a while to sit back and to hear some of the things that are on the minds of people in different generations or what people from a variety of backgrounds, what they're hearing based on their lived experience, based on their work experience. And those things need to count. And so if we're trying to do something that is going to benefit the college as a whole and not just one particular group, right? There are some universities that are solely, I would say they are very dominant on making sure that almost everything is in service of the faculty, right? And they will tell you that, right? They will say our faculty are our most important members of our college, right? sometimes I cringe at that. I'm like, okay, well, the students, the staff, and the grad students, and the postdocs, right?
Yes.
But there's some people, there's some institutions that really feel that way. I've been on I've done some seminars and workshops and been on some committees at MIT, for example. And at MIT, I loved all my colleagues, but they were very, very focused on the, at the time, the graduate student population when I was, doing some work there. And so some of the undergraduates, it's like, you're just a means to getting different things done. And, we're really focusing on research. And of course, the research is very, very important. I mean, after all, this is CBS, we're scientists, right? And I have a science background, so I can appreciate this. My background is in both engineering and science, and I did work in vocal physiology and otolaryngology. And so I can appreciate that. So I appreciate, the desire to have, our science and discovery and sort of making that the focus, because after all, we're in the business of making new scientists as part of CBS. Yes. But at the same time, we need to make sure that, again, all voices are heard, the entire college thrives, and And really, I mean, we want new students to come in and to just be so excited about their experience, to be so excited about what they're learning in class, for the staff to be so excited about the services that they are rendering and giving, and the mentoring that they're giving, and whatever expertise they're bringing to the table. They want to have good experiences with their peers as well. So there are all these different facets, because people need to have good experiences in the classroom. Faculty need to feel empowered for what they're giving. Staff need to be empowered and make sure that they have good relations with their peers, so that they have an environment that is going to be peaceful, hopefully, and just ready to be in service to all. And if we can, it sounds idealistic, but it's not impossible. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be these ebbs and flows, but we can work toward that.
Definitely, and it's important, it's critical. And so it's the mission of what we're trying to do here. Yes. And thank you so much for that. And so we're moving on to our second topic area. So the second topic focuses on how we can work within these existing university power structures to make meaningful change.
Yes.
So the first question for this area, so, I mean, we sort of touched on it a little bit. What should be the overarching mission for a committee like this? Should a committee like this ultimately be charged with recommending policies and practices to its dean that they would be in charge of enacting? And who should we be accountable to as a committee?
Yes. So you should be accountable to the dean within the college. So that's first and foremost. So the dean also has to be accountable to the provost. And in terms of our office and its involvement, our office works with a variety of different structures. So I check in with the dean. The dean is part of a group called the DEIJ, which the executive leadership team, many of the deans on the campus are part of. So Dean Winey, for example, has been participating in that since I've arrived. And we also have a group called the CCC&D, which I think maybe you might be part of that, and Associate Dean Powers might also be a part of that, which is our campus council on community, climate, and diversity. And so there are a lot of other people who are either in charge of the DEI efforts in their colleges, or they are the representatives of DEI in their colleges, in their units across campus, whether it's academic or non-academic, and they all come together. But to answer your question specifically, just sort of in terms of the hierarchy, yes, committee, if the committee is formed out of the college, then the committee should report to the dean.
Okay.
Be beholden to the dean, make the recommendations to the dean. The dean, in a sense, does have the, I would say, just the overarching authority over it's sort of, it's one of those things that it exists, at the will of the dean. That's how a lot of these kinds of committees work. Now, when that committee is established, our office can have a linkage. So there can be a check-in, but not without the check-in to the dean, right? If we're going to just sort of follow protocol, it would check in with the dean. So for example, once the committee has its recommendations and so forth, it would be one of those things where there would be a reporting to the dean or the dean's committee or the dean's leadership to say, these are the recommendations that have come from our DEI and J committee, and these are the things that we'd like to see. And then contact my office, and I can have a presentation as well, or people on my team can have a presentation to say, this is what the CBS committee is doing. We want to make sure that we are either in line with how things are going with the university, or we want you to know, or if there's anything that you can recommend above and beyond what our recommendations are, then we would like to have that kind of feedback. So that's the way that it should work. Now, like I said, the dean participates in the DEI ELT on one side, the Provost Leadership Council, which the deans all participate in with the provost. But in addition to that, our office is very strongly, I should say strongly connected, but our office also connects with a group that we have on campus called the auditing, I forgot what AMA stands for, but it's an auditing and management system that is part of the university. So the university does have a mechanism to do audits on different colleges, different units, and so forth. And so the dean would be beholden to anything that might come from that particular office related to is an accountability structure. So it doesn't just sort of go into the ether. It's something where, you know, the committee would just recommend something to the dean and then it goes away. There's another set of sort of Q&A and answers and filling out all kinds of surveys, which I know that there's survey fatigue, you know, filling out spreadsheets about what have you done related to these things. And all of those things are a lot of extra time, extra effort, people putting in all kinds of hours trying to give the information, but it does make a difference because then on our side, we can come back and say, for example, look at what CBS is doing, right? And as other colleges come and say, well, what can we do? Then we can point to a college like CBS and the kinds of things you're doing. This town hall, as an example, would be something that I can talk about when I talk to other colleges. Like, you know what? They invited me for a town hall. And we had a very frank discussion about DEIJ.
Awesome. And so it sounded like we can get our recommendations, we give it to the dean, but we can also give it to this other committee that can help us enforce some of these recommendations. Is that?
So no, the way that it works is that you give your recommendations to the dean. During certain cycles, this other group will contact the dean.
Okay.
What has happened here? What have you, what are, do you have a committee? Have you done anything related to these things? And then the dean would probably pull your report or whatever and contact you and then say, oh, here's what we've done. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we got to do. Here's where our gaps are.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you. Consultation between them.
Perfect. In terms of accessing on-campus funds to support these potential initiatives, is there funding available through your office for certain initiatives and internal research? And if so, is there a way to access or apply to that funding?
Very good question. Questions about budget are things that we don't want to talk about because we never have money to do what we want to do. And of course, during this particular period of the pandemic and Delta virus, so we're not post-pandemic, even though we're coming back to campus, there are still a lot of things that we are concerned with. All of the colleges and the units have had to think about cuts. It's very unfortunate. And there are a lot of things that we'd like to do that we're not quite able to do. Yeah. So there is a small pot of money for undergraduate students and undergraduate organizations who want to do something specific to principles of community. And that goes through our director of campus community engagement, Dr. Vicky Gomez, and she helps to manage that process. That's not a lot of money. It's a couple $100. For some of the larger kinds of things, I would say the thing that you did, Vicky, last year, where you specifically just came out and asked me, you said, is it possible to potentially get Dr. Abraham Kendi to come to campus? Do we have money for that? Could our office give CBS money to sponsor it? I said, unfortunately, no, we don't have that to the college, but because you made that recommendation and others who are in other colleges were also making recommendations, then I was able to take that back to our group. And then our campus community book project was able to work very hard with Dr. Kendi's group. And it took several months, but he is going to be coming to campus in 2022, March, for a campus-wide discussion. The campus book for this season, this year, 2021-22, is going to be How to Be an Anti-Racist. And there are going to be all kinds of activities throughout the schools and colleges for the entire year based on that theme. So that's a way that, you know, if you have an initiative or if you have something that you're thinking about, we may not have money specifically within DEI to say, and we're going to give it to CBS to do it. Maybe some ways to collaborate. So we had to do that for this. So it's DEI, it's the provost office, you know, has different pieces. The Mondavi Center is working with us for this. So there's a whole, you know, cadre of groups that work together. Similarly, if you have certain kinds of things that you want to do or that the committee wants to do, let's see if it's something where we might already have a fund that will support it. Certainly within the college, there might be a fund that helps to support it. So I'll give you an example of something that we did when I first came on board in 2019. I first came in 2019, I had an opportunity to work with one of your esteemed faculty, Dr. Rebecca Khaleesi Rodriguez, on SOCNIS. So SOCNIS is the Society for Advancement for Chicana and Native American Scientists. And they had a huge conference. They have a huge conference every year that is fantastic in terms of its mentoring of students at the undergraduate and graduate level, but it's also a wonderful opportunity for faculty to go to learn more about mentoring, to form stronger bonds and connections with students, and then graduate schools and folks can also recruit for future graduate students. Now, involved with SOCNIS before, very familiar with it, talked to Dr. Khaleesi, and was able to, with some funding that I had, help to support many students who were part of BUSP and some of the other programs, and some of the other programs within the Undergraduate Research Center, some of the faculty to go. And I think I don't remember how many we took. I think we took about 30 people to this conference in Hawaii last 2 years ago. And so I would like to be able to continue to do that. I don't know if I'm going to have the budget coming up this year, but those are some of the kinds of things. Now, one of the things, we've done some studies on this, and I totally believe in social sciences, we talk about leapfrogging, and leapfrogging can help self-efficacy of students. And then the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine also has this report that came out last year on the science of effective mentoring in STEM. They talk about extending your science network and your mentoring network and having these constellations. So it's more than just the advisor, it's more than just the faculty member in the classroom, but there are these organizations, and a student should have the opportunity to tap into these networks, both internally and externally. And so I strongly believe in that. We have data, there's evidence connected to that. And so to facilitate those kinds of opportunities, that also fits into the D&I strategic vision, because the D&I strategic vision not only talks about goal 1, where we're attracting and identifying and helping to successfully graduate students from diverse backgrounds, but goal 3 also talks about having a climate that is very conducive to inclusion. And when people go away like that and go to conferences, they're presenting their research, they're getting validation externally, they're among others who are in their field, but also in some similar age groups, then they come back feeling empowered. And if that empowerment is then validated back in the classroom and in the laboratory, then it just promotes all kinds of A, good feelings, B, discovery, C, more papers, better results, all of those different kinds of things.
I'm smiling so much because you actually shared that report with me from the about effective mentorship. And we use that to create the new community mentorship and training program in the College of Biological Sciences that I help run with Dr. Ebony Blackwell. And so thank you so much for sharing that with me. And that has been the guiding document for how we've created that program. So little side plug for that program that we've started.
Wonderful, wonderful. And if I can say something about that. So one of the things in that entire report, when they talk about mentoring, so there are some things that are shifting. And this is shifting in science, and a lot of the science discussions. I gave a talk about this to the National Science Board earlier this year. Also a talk, it was an invited talk from the National Science Foundation earlier this year. But the shift in mentoring also from sort of these dyadic models where you have one advisor who sort of has jurisdiction over one student. This is at the graduate level. And also though at the undergraduate level where you have students who are in a lab, sometimes there can be a level of people feeling territorial. And we understand that sometimes there are things that, you don't have all the permissions yet, and some things may still be under some kind of discretionary ways of thinking, because you might be trying to get a patent or trying to prevent someone from the outside from taking your work. So there are all of those kinds of things. But mentoring has these different levels. So there's the professional side, but there's also the psychosocial side. And that psychosocial side can sometimes come from people who are from faculty who may not necessarily be a student's primary advisor or primary lab PI, right? There might be other PIs who may be helpful in one particular way that's different than another way. So all of those things are important.
Definitely agree. So let's see. My next question here. is about resistance. So what advice would you give us for how we can continue to make change in the face of resistance? So as far as I know, there's no overt resistance that we face in our college. But I feel like, unfortunately, it isn't uncommon for people to think that this work that we do might be extraneous or outside of the scope of our work as academics, which I very strongly disagree with. But I think that thoughts like that sort of maintain a status quo that continues to exclude and reject people, like me, from being successful in our academic spaces. So I think I'd class that sort of thought as a form of covert or internal resistance. So how do we continue to make lasting and effective and impactful change when faced with ideas like that in the academy?
That's a great question, Vicky. So one of the things that I would recommend is looking at your national professional organizations to see what they are saying about issues of DEI, about issues of justice, about issues of anti-racism, anti-Semitism, all of those different areas, and looking to them and saying, okay, our professional organizations are saying these things, which means, in a sense, this is part of our purview, right? When we think about holistic science, where we're not just talking about just sort of being single-minded, mm-hmm. and just sort of turning on our brains and just operating in one direction. And just because, again, we're trained as scientists, we still have two lobes, right? We still have the right brain and the left brain. We still have the corpus callosum. So we're going to, we have to have these things that are going to be connected together. Now, I do have a resource for you. In addition to the National Academy's report, the AAAS, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, has a wonderful project called Sea Change. And mm-hmm. Change is talking about sort of science and equity and advancement. And they actually have a committee that deals with DEI in the law. So one of the things that I think can be really helpful, especially when you're developing this committee, is to make sure that everyone has a clear definition of what you mean by diversity, what you mean by equity, mm-hmm. inclusion, and justice, right? So with diversity, we're recognizing all kinds of identities. We're making sure there is an awareness that the different interests, experiences, racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, we're talking about genders, we're talking about identities. There's an awareness of that when you think about diversity. When you think about equity, it's recognizing that there are different things that have happened in history where everyone doesn't necessarily have equal access, but we want to help to create the structures that are going to give us that access, or going to give people that access. With inclusion, there's a recognition that something has to be done about it, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be an opportunity to sort of realize the full benefits of diversity and to make sure that everyone is able to participate. And it's awareness, making sure that if there are people who would be or could be marginalized or otherwise excluded from a process, that they are in that process. Mm-hmm. And justice, making sure that there's like a maintenance and administration of making sure that whatever the equitable procedures are, that they're being put in place. So with diversity, there's awareness. With equity, there's awareness with a little bit of action. With inclusion, there's absolute action. And with justice, there's actual maintenance of that action. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that those are in place, that everyone who's on the committee is very clear about their mission, folding it in certainly with the D&I strategic vision, as we said, those 5 goals, recognizing that even goes into To Boldly Go, which is our university-wide set of strategic goals, and it's goal 3 in To Boldly Go. So goal 3, the very first thing it says is implement that D&I strategic vision. And that's what we're trying to do now as a campus. But another thing along that line is just being cognizant of different things that are happening in the department, mm-hmm. that happened in the department in the past and that may happen in the future, and how you can help to affect that change. So I did a quick little look at CBS. And of course, this is a big school, right? You have 5 departments, 8 graduate groups, about 130 faculty, 6,000 undergraduate, it's about 450 graduate students, including master's and PhDs, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people, and that's a lot of folks who I think probably want to be on the right side of history, right? But the leadership has to also help to shape that. So let me switch to something just fairly quickly, because one of the things that we're also talking about on campus is trying to help people to understand the 5 pedagogical stances that Dr. Maisha Nguyen and Dr. Tori Nguyen have put into place. They are faculty from the School of Education, and they run our Transformative Justice and Education Center. Now, those 5 stances are history matters, race matters, justice matters, language matters, and futures matter. So when I history, one of the first things I thought about when I was thinking about coming today, this morning, it sort of dawned on me. I was like, history, what's in the history of CBS, right? So I went to your website. I went to the website and I went to the history page. And the first thing that stood out to me is they talked about, this 100 years, right? 100 years of history and life sciences. How fantastic, right? That's really wonderful. One of the things that struck me first, now, I'm a woman and I'm a scientist, right? So I start counting how many women do I see that are here, right? So I'm just going to give you a little factoid when you think about history. So if I looked at the women who are listed on that history page for CBS, between 2020 and the 1990s, I counted, I think there were 8 women compared to 17 men in the same time frame. So Karen Zito, Ann Britt, Joanne Engelbrecht, Kimberly McAllister, Gail Patricelli, Jody, I think it's Nuneri, and I might be pronouncing it wrong because I scribbled, Lois Crow, Katayun Dehesh. I think those are the ones that I counted, compared to 17 men. Now, if you look at the National Science Foundation's just numbers in terms of students who are going into biological sciences, we're getting closer to parity in biology. It's one of the few areas in STEM where we're getting closer to parity, right? Now,
I actually think we're beyond parity.
Say again, Dr.
I think we're beyond parity.
Beyond parity, okay, makes my point more, right? So, so the key is, if in that historical retrospective, you only had half the number of women as you do men who are sort of highlighted on the history page for their accolades. And then after 1990, it goes all the way down. I saw something about, like, Catherine Esau, I think, and then like something in the 40s, and very little about women, just on the gender side, right? And so you think about that. I did notice something interesting. In 1969, they talked about student protests about the war in Vietnam, right? But this is also an opportunity, for example, to say in 2021, you started the DEIJ committee. With the support of the dean's office, in response, and it could be in response to racial unrest from 2020 and recognizing historical inequities of the past, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It could be part of the history. So when you think about history, the other thing that can be incredibly powerful yet painful is to really dig deep into the histories of things that may have created inequities over the years. Now, you might decide that you need a facilitator to help with this, right? Maybe someone from the TJE, it may be someone who helps with restorative justice. It may be a conversation that says, you know what, we might uncover a couple of things, so we don't want to do this by ourselves. And we want to have some ground rules where everyone can speak, where everyone can share, but then there's a person who is skilled to help to bring us back together again, so we have some common ground. So those kinds of things, you have to dig deep. What has happened, for example, in some of the REUs, the research experiences for undergraduates? Have the undergraduates had a good experience? I know that there have been some connections with HBCUs, for example, through UCOP, where there's been some summer programs. Look at the history. Has there been a good trajectory? Has it worked well? Are there things that haven't worked? If there are things that haven't worked, have things been put in place to help it work better? What are we doing in terms of faculty and faculty diversity? You have a lot of faculty who are now part of Campos, for example, and they're, through the college for Campos, the Center for Advancement of Multicultural Perspectives in Science.
Yep.
Are there faculty who may not necessarily be Campos scholars, but could still use some support? What's the mechanism for them? Right. So there are these different kinds of questions that would be asked. What's happening with graduate students? Is there a good advising mechanism? Are students getting opportunities? Are they presenting? Are they then given the tools that they need for getting good postdocs? Are they given the tools and the networks? Are their faculty connecting them so that they can then have a good interviewing process? So I'll give you an example from one of my biology colleagues from a different university. And, we've traveled together at conferences and so forth. So while I won't give his name, I will share the experience. And I've talked to him about this before, and he's become quite a strong champion. So early on, when he had women in his lab, and particularly women from very diverse backgrounds. He was just sort of leaving them on their own to get, they were doing the research and that was great. But when it came time for them to be ready for faculty positions, he wasn't doing anything. So I was walking sort of in the student union with him one day, and we were about to get on the elevator, and I asked him, I said, you know what, have you talked to your colleagues at, and I knew some of the university because I'd read some of his papers. I said, at ABC University, to tell them about, student A, student B, student C. And he's like, no, why would I do that? And I said, well, they are your proteges. They are your students. You always talk about how they've done great work. They have, first author papers, and this is really good. You should really recommend them to some of your colleagues, at least for postdocs. Mm-hmm. And they can consider, if they want to have them or invite them to apply for a faculty position. And he's like, yeah, but do I really need to do that? And then I mentioned that, I was just with you at this other conference, and I saw you talk to your friend about one of your other students in the lab who happened to be male. And, you just casually say, you know what, you should think about my student so-and-so. So, sometimes people have blockages and they don't realize they have blockages. I had another person, again, at airports and things like that, when you're having casual conversations are really great for this. But he talked about how when he was an undergrad, he never planned to go to graduate school. And this is now full professor, center director and all that. Different school, different country even. But we were just sitting talking, sort of waiting for a flight. And he said, he really didn't plan to go to graduate school, but there was a faculty member who encouraged him to go at every stage. It's like, you should go get a master's. Oh, okay, I'll do it. Okay, you should get a PhD. Oh, okay, I don't know, I'll do it. And then, well, you should become a faculty member. Oh, okay. And now he's this, renowned faculty member. He had done a keynote and all that kind of thing. And so I asked him, I started talking about his lab because I had given this talk about sort of diversity in STEM. And I was asking him about the women in his lab. And he said, well, the girls in this is the term he used. He said, the girls in my lab really don't want to go to grad school. I was like, how do you know? Have you asked them? He's like, well, no, they just don't seem to show any interest. I said, have you asked them? And he said, well, no, why would I do that? I said, because somebody asked you and somebody convinced you to do the same thing. And he had never thought about it, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just have to bring things up. Mm-hmm. Just have to say, hey, let's make sure that we are, and we can think about it in a broad way. It doesn't even have to be in, you talked about people who might be averse. We don't necessarily even have to think about it as you have to be, this justice warrior. And in order to be this justice warrior, then you say these things. It can be all about, we want all of our students to just embrace the science that we love. And we want to, some of the national academies also talk, especially in engineering, they talk about individualized learning, right? We want to make sure that we're talking to each person as much as possible, finding out what they like, finding out what's going to help to give them that spark, maybe thinking about some best practices. There might be putting people in groups. There might be, think, pair, share kinds of opportunities that we can employ in the classroom, all of these different things. But we want people from the time they come in until the time they graduate, and even beyond that, to be part of this scientific family. And there's no, okay, these people over here aren't going to make it, and these people over here are our star students, start thinking about everyone who comes in as your star students. Everyone who comes in is going to get the opportunity. If there's something that they're not doing, how can we help them? How can we find out more? How can we learn more? How can we assist, right? A couple of administrations ago, I had an opportunity to talk to someone who was in charge of the White House Science and Technology Policy, who used to be part of a lab and talked about being part of a lab where the professor felt that it was his job to make sure that everybody got an A. And just, you know, if people were not sort of measuring up, then he would say to himself, I must be doing something that's not helping here. So let's see what else I can do. And there was just real effort in that. Now, does it take a lot of work? It does. Does it take extra time? It does. I know that people have large classes at CBS. My largest class, I think at one time, was about 300 students when I used to teach at University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I used to have what I call coffee hours at a local coffee shop, and it was in a, you know, open window. So I always sat near the window, and I would have these days where people would come in at like 20-minute times and we'd just sit and have coffee. And we would talk, and I would say, how are things going? What can we help with? What do you need help with? What do you want me to know about, you know, how you're doing this? And I did it with every single student, every semester, right? And that really helped. And then the class started growing and growing and growing. It's like, wow, okay, good. But I'm gonna need some help. I need some TAs. But you know, sometimes even just having that kind of conversation and asking people little things, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How is this working? Do you like the topic? Is there something you don't understand? How can I help? Having that kind of knowledge base is, and putting ourselves out there. And it's okay if we're introvert. I'm an introvert, right? I always tell people I'm an INFJ. So I am, you know, that person that after this is over, I'm going to go and sip my coffee in a corner and tell people, all right, leave me alone for a little while. I just need some time to myself. Okay. So it's okay if you're not the sort of extroverted type to do this. The key is we love our science. How do we get people involved so that we can help to solve the problems and the challenges that we're seeing in this world, every level, right? So let me leave. I think you probably have some more questions.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I really appreciate that conversation. And I think I was trying to think of how to formulate a question like that for this town hall. And I think we definitely need to circle through with you said the Institutes of Transformative Justice to just figure out how we can sort of come to terms with what has happened in the past. How do we come to terms with that history to, you know, correct that and move forward as a college together. So I think that's really important for our journey together, and part of what we can do as a committee to move forward together. So we have about 10 minutes left, and so I think we can move into the Q&A part.
Yes, please, by all means.
So I can start with some audience questions that were pre-submitted. So the first question I see here, what is UC Davis doing to make sure that academic freedom is preserved in the face of big donors?
Very interesting. So, you know, with academic freedom, one of the things that, at least from the side that we're seeing it in our DEI office, is what is academic freedom versus, quite frankly, hate speech, right? And trying to understand what is allowed versus now what should go through HDAP or what should be investigated and things like that. And so, our office itself has been working with the law school, with King Hall. We had a webinar last, I think it was in the spring, where we worked with one of the key leaders in academic freedom, who is part of the law school, but also part of a UCOP for the Office of the President, UC Office of the President Center on Academic Freedom, so that we better understand what some of those details and those caveats are. In terms of big donors who might say, okay, well, we're going to give to you only if you say this or not say this. This is something that DVAR kind of works with and works through. We haven't necessarily, I take that back. It's not that we haven't seen certain things on their side. One thing that we have seen from donors is if they feel that the university or one of our offices may not have spoken up enough or fast enough in a situation where they may feel that a particular group has been marginalized. And in some cases, it can be good feedback. It can be, let us take a look, let's see what we can do, let's see what we've already done, and make sure that, again, when we talk about inclusion, that we are including all groups. Now, I have not seen on my side, there may be some differences that others have seen on their sides related to, if you support this group or if you support DEI, then we're not going to support you in terms of funding. I know that our folks in development are trying to work with our donors to have great conversations with them, to sort of share the university's values and mission and what we're trying to do to get their input. And so that we're at least similarly on the same page or slightly on the same page. I think if there are situations where people are just totally opposed, I don't know if we're working with them or if we're just making some decisions to say that, well, we'll just have to let this one go. I don't know of any donors right now, and now this doesn't mean that it's not the case, but I don't know of any right now who are holding, sort of money over our heads to say that we have to do one thing or the other that goes against our values.
Yeah.
It's more along the lines of, are we sticking to our values in even very, very small ways to make sure that, all people from all groups and all walks of life are being taken care of and are being attended to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I should say one other thing. Let me say one other thing about academic freedom. There is a group of faculty in our area that has a new grant from UCOP, Advancing Faculty Diversity Grant, and it's specifically on academic freedom. It's called Dialogues Across Difference. And so there's going to be, it was just awarded this summer. And so there are going to be more literal dialogues about academic freedom coming up in the next academic year.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question is about the terminology of including justice. So including the terminology of justice seems to be relatively new to mainstream DEI efforts. What is your stance or view on including that in the DEI acronym? Why is it important to include justice? And what do you think is the significance of justice in higher ed and the sciences?
So again, the interesting part about justice is that justice implies an action and that action will be maintained. And so I like it. Now, would we do it sort of overall in our DEI practice? For us, the I includes justice, but for individual committees, I think it's perfectly fine. And there are people who turn it around. So you might have seen it as Jedi, right? Yeah. So JEDI, and there are some groups that are looking at it in that way. And I think that it's perfectly fine. Now, will we again change it overall? Not in this next upcoming year, because we're really solidifying the DEI piece. But interestingly enough, as sort of a result of this town hall and this conversation, it is something that I will consider adding into the conversation more often as we have talks over the next year.
Great, thank you so much. And another question is about increasing crosstalk between all the DEI committees at different levels across the university. And so the question, I think, is just trying to focus on integrating DEI committees at different levels or within different units across the university. Is your office working on doing any sort of integration between different colleges across the campus?
So that's what the CCC&D is supposed to be doing. We have we have some leadership discussions that are happening there. I would recommend, I think, again, since you're on that committee or Associate Dean Howard, please raise that at the next meeting. If you think that there needs to be a lot more or a little bit more or some suggestions on how to have more discussions across, because all the people who are on that committee, and I think I would say there are about 50 of them, that they all are connected and fit in. Now, interestingly enough, recently at our summer retreat for the DEI ELT, again, which is that executive leadership team, as well as a CCC&D, we had people set up these sort of peer connected committees of about 3 or 4 people, accountability teams, that's what we call them. And those accountability teams had about 4 people from different areas. So on my accountability team, I have a person from the Ombuds office. I had a person from Student Affairs and Mental Health, and I have a person from the Graduate School of Management. And so that was an opportunity. We've met once and we've talked, a couple of times, so I hope that people are working within those committees. If those committees need to be strengthened, those sort of subcommittees, then that would be helpful. But there are also the administrative advisory committees, such as SDAC, which is the Disability Advisory Committee, SWADAC, which is the Advisory Committee on Women, and those are throughout the campus. That is also we're also looking at that as a new structure. So we're looking at some restructuring of that because for some of those groups hasn't changed in about 10 years, I've just learned. So I'll be looking at that as well.
I'm not on CCC&D. I think, Ted, are you on that one? But there's a follow-up here about the AA and D committee. So do you know where that would fit into the structure here? I'm not sure what the acronym means.
Is the AA and D, I'm not sure what that one is. If that one is
Affirmative Action and Diversity.
Yes.
Okay.
Academic Federation Committee.
Oh, it's a Federation Committee. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a little bit different. Yeah, that's a little bit different. So committees that are part of either the Academic Senate or the Academic Federation are separate from what we do in diversity, but there are representatives from both the Senate and from the Federation on the DEI ELT. So those committees, we don't have jurisdiction over. The Academic Senate faculty, the Academic Federation, the faculty have jurisdiction over that committee. Every now and then, we will have members of that committee, and I might be if the Academic Senate chair, for example, calls a meeting or wants some consultation, then we do have those kinds of meetings. And I saw that Jennifer, is it Doan or Doan, is representing CBS at the CCC&D.
Yeah, great. Okay, great. Awesome. Yes, Academic Senate A&D. Great. So it looks like we're just about out of time. So I really just want to reiterate that we're so grateful to have you out here today to come and talk to us about these really important issues. You really set us on a really great path, gave us some really great tips for how to establish this committee and really come to terms with a lot of these issues and how we should move forward as a college. It's been so informative and enlightening, and I'm sure that everyone that attended can really come back and take some of these lessons back to their own units or departments to continue this work in earnest. So thank you so much for everyone that attended today, and please be sure to check out our new CBS DEI website, which is diversity.biology.ucdavis.edu, which is on the slide right now. In a few days for the recording of the town hall. I think that's all I have to say. Mark, did you have any final comments before we close it out?
No, I just wanted to thank you and Renetta for this discussion. Thank the audience for their participation. I liked Ebony's question about justice very much, so I'm glad we got to it. So again, Renetta, thank you for the time. We greatly appreciate it. I imagine we're going to ask you back in the future as our work goes forward.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. And it was a pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.